Okay, good morning. This next welder that we're going to get acquainted with is going to be our Lincoln 255. And the Lincoln 255 is going to be very similar to our previous lesson with our Power MIG 215 from Lincoln Electric. And that there are going to be two different dials that we're going to be playing around with our voltage and our wire speed. But with the 255, you do have a couple of different other mechanisms that you could be able to adjust with your welder in order to get that perfect bead when putting together a project. But I'll keep this as basic as I can. Now, I'm not going to go over the setting up the gases. The gases are going to be the same between the 255, the 215. Every MIG welder that we have in our shop is going to have a PSI of 20 when it comes to our CO2, and that's going to be indoors. 20 PSI if you're indoors, 25 if you're going to be outside. But when it comes to our wire speed and our voltage, just like our 215, we're looking at a side panel here in order to set up what would be our voltage and our wire speed. Now, with this particular welder, you have several different settings that you could be able to create. Anything varying from welding on aluminum to welding stainless steel. But in this case, what we're going to be looking at is this green bar here, the MIG Super Arc. And what we'll look at, you have two different gases to choose from, 100% CO2 or a 75-25 mixture. We're looking at the 75-25 mixture, so only keep your eyes on this bar here. With every welder that you have in the shop, they're all going to have the same wire size. That's going to be our 0.035. So I try to keep it simple as I can for the students. In this case, the 0.035 is set up on every single welder. So in the scenario that I'm going to be welding with is a 3/16 metal. And I'm just going to line up where the two bars meet up between the 035 and the 316. I have a voltage of 19 and a wire speed of 350. I go back to my front. I'll set up my wire speed at 350. A very sensitive dial, a slight turn can boost or lower your number for the wire speed. I got it at 315, and of course 19 set up for my voltage. Down here I could set up like how much the difficulty that a lot of students run into. They may bump it if they're working, but the one that tends to be rather tricky is spot time, and that's the amount of wire, or excuse me, the amount of weld that you're allowed at a time, and it's set up by second. So if I set up a 5 seconds there, I'm only allowed 5 seconds to be able to weld. The kid could be welding for 5 seconds, and all of a sudden the weld would just stop. Now that's for if you're creating like little seams, like intermittent between your project. A little seam there for 5 seconds, another seam there for 5 seconds, as if you do set it up to that 5 second spot time. A lot of students run into that issue. Just simply turn to the off position. That allows you to weld as long as your heart desires. But as far as your setup for your wire speed and your voltage, your two dials here, again, digital as opposed to our 215 that's going to have analog dials. In that case, the 255 is a lot more accurate and really pinpoints the voltage and wire speed that you would really like with a weld. Now, the next discussion would be, is this the ideal setting for your wire speed? Now, depending upon the person that's going to be welding, if you like to keep it how it is with what Lincoln Electric recommends, yes, this is just the recommendation from Lincoln Electric, but every welder is different. I tend to like to mess around with a weld that's slightly below what is recommended from Lincoln Electric, allowing the weld to get a little bit more heat. Again, this is very dependent upon what you like, and what I recommend for students is play with the welds a little bit. Okay, so when you go about while you're welding, if you see that your weld is it's running a little bit too cold, you could always adjust the wire feed. I wouldn't mess around with the voltage. I'd leave it how it is. But the wire speed, you could always play around with it. If you feel like your weld is getting a little bit too much feed, a little bit too much wire, you can always slow it down a little bit if it's looking too cold. If it's looking a little bit too hot, that you're not getting enough wire, feel free. You can be able to boost it up if you like. But ultimately, the adjustment I would play around with would be that wire feed speed. But in a nutshell, this is our setup for our 255. If you'd like a little bit more detail on setting up a MIG welder, please refer back to the first video, that is setting up a Lincoln Electric Power MIG 215.